All right, welcome back to the Swift channel. My name is Max, and in this video, we're going to take a look at UIViewControllerRepresentable and UIPageViewController, and the goal here is to use a UIPageViewController or really any UIViewController subclass within SwiftUI Views, right? So you could be here for a couple of reasons, but the main two are you want to learn how to put a view controller of any sort inside of your SwiftUI apps, kind of integrate the two, or you just want to use UIPageViewController specifically with SwiftUI. And then again, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe you just want to learn how to use ViewControllerRepresentable or UIHostingController and a few other things. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this video. I'll try and make it quick, but overall it's going to be really straightforward. Well, it'll be straightforward and I'll show you how to do it step by step, but you're probably not going to immediately understand it because it's actually kind of hard to understand at first how all these things work together. And it even took me probably like 1 or 2 days to fully understand what was going on. But by watching this video and just reiterating over it and messing around with the code after you write it, I promise you, if you give it enough effort, you will gain an understanding of these things, right? And these are just 3 of the classes we're going to be using. There's actually multiple. I'll probably include the source code. If you're curious about that, just look at the description. I might have a link down there for that. If I get some comments asking for it, that's when I'll kind of update the description with the source code. Okay, so let's go ahead and just get started. I don't want to do too much talking, and the way you're going to learn it is by actually just doing it. So let's just get into it. Okay, so I'm going to create a new app in Xcode, and I'm just going to choose single view app, and let's just have it select Swift for the language and SwiftUI for the interface, and let's just name it like representable, just whatever you want. I'm going to call it representable, but essentially you want it to have something around the name of UIViewControllerRepresentable because that's kind of the main focus of this video. All right, so real quick, I just want to explain something really simple. So we have UIViewControllerRepresentable and UIHostingController, and they kind of do the same thing in reverse. So they actually really don't do the same thing, but they have a similar concept behind it. So essentially, I need to stop saying essentially, but basically UIViewControllerRepresentable helps us put view controllers inside of SwiftUI views, right? So a SwiftUI view that represents a UIKit view controller. Okay, so that's what I'm pretty sure they mean SwiftUI view by view, because that's what it does, right? It allows us to use a view controller in a SwiftUI view, a SwiftUI interface. Okay, whereas hosting controller does the opposite. It gives us a UIKit view that holds a SwiftUI view hierarchy. Okay, and I made a video on this on my channel. It is actually the last, that upload right there. You can check that out if you want, but let's get into the code for this video. Okay, so let's start off by just kind of expanding this a bit. And I think the code's zoomed in enough. Let me know in the comments if that's too small. And yeah, the first thing we want to really do is we want to create a struct class, so a struct with UIViewControllerRepresentable subclass. So we'll say struct, and we're just going to call this PageViewController, okay? And this is going to be of type UIViewControllerRepresentable. And the first thing we need to do is really provide a type for this. So you're going to get this error, and if you don't, just type this out. Type alias UIViewController type is equal to UIPageViewController, okay? So I really highly recommend following every line of code in this video, but if you wanted to use UIViewController here, you could do that. If you wanted to use UITableViewController here, you could do that. And I'm explaining that because I want you to understand what this line does, and it is providing us the type of UIPageViewController. And once you type this, you have to type this first. You're going to get this new error, okay? So this error won't come up unless you type this out, all right? And if we hit fix here, it's going to conform to the UIViewControllerRepresentable protocol, and that's going to add these 2 methods, make UIViewController and update UIViewController. Okay, now I don't know why it's saying it again. We can ignore that. Oh, okay, so the reason it's doing that is because for some reason it's inferring this as UITableViewController. So I'm going to hit Command Z and just save it, wait a couple seconds, and then if I fix it again, it should. Okay, so it updated it to UIPageViewController. So by that kind of bug just showing up right there, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's basically making these methods based on the type you put here, and that's why this is required, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and make our UIViewController, which is our page view controller. So I'll say let page view controller is equal to UIPageViewController. And we want to make sure we use this bottom initializer so that we can get it looking the way we want. If we do it like this, it's going to have a weird little scroll, like page effect. We just want to use the scroll effect, not page scroll. Okay, and then for navigation, let's just do horizontal options. Let's just get rid of that. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now we just need to return the page view controller. Okay, now we're on our way here. We have a lot to do still, but I want to make it clear that like what we're going to do here is we're going to set the data source eventually in the video, right? And then that's going to allow us to implement the UIPageViewController data source methods. But that's when we get into coordinators. So I'll talk about coordinators later in the video, and it's a little complex. Like you probably won't understand it initially if you've never done this, but again, just by watching this a couple times, you should be able to understand it. Okay, so let's move on. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to provide some controllers for our page view controller, right? So let's say var controllers is of type, let's say UIViewController, because our page controllers need to contain some view controllers, right? And for this video, we're just going to do simple, like one little tiny views with strings in them, right? All right, so let's go ahead and let us start. All right, so what we want to do is we want to create a container view, okay, that will contain our page view controller representable. So we'll say struct and we'll say container view is of type UIView, and then we'll just say var body some view, and then in here we're basically just gonna put page view controller, and we don't have an initializer yet, I don't believe. Well, we don't really need one because we have controllers here and that's how SwiftUI works, but we need to provide some of these controllers, right? But we want to create it so we're not passing in UIViewControllers. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go into here and we want to say init, and we want to put an underscore. We don't really care about that. And we'll put pages, or we'll put title pages. Let's just put titles, and then we'll put it's an array of string, right? Okay, and if this doesn't make sense, just stand by. And what we'll do here is we will pass in self.controllers, right? For our controllers right here. But where are these coming from? Well, we'll create those in here, okay? So let's just create controllers right here, and we'll make this of type UIHostingController, okay? Now, what we need to do is we need to create UIHostingControllers out of the titles we're passing in, okay? That way we can put views inside of our view controller, okay? So we need to hit this fix, and then for this, we want to put in a type, right? And this type is just going to be title page, simple title page controllers, right? And we can create this by saying struct title page, and we'll make this a view, and then in here we're just going to say var body some view, right? And then in here we'll just put text, and we'll put title, and then we'll create a variable called title. All right, so now what we need to do is kind of generate these hosting controllers out of these titles, right? But where are these titles coming from? Well, they're coming from our preview. So in our preview, let's initialize it again, except for let's use container, let's use container view. So container view, and we'll put titles in, and this I'll just put like subscribe, comment, and then I'll just put my website name. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we are going to go into our container view here, and we're gonna generate our controllers off of these titles. And let's see what this error is. Conform to view. Let's just ignore that for now, and let's change this from UIView to view. Okay, that's why we were getting that error. Okay, so it says we're missing an argument label of controllers. Let's just hit fix. That'll add controllers in front of there. And we're kind of set up really nicely here. We just need to set up our hosting controllers now. So what we're going to do is we're going to say self.controllers is equal to titles.map. And I'm not going to follow the syntax that is here in the autocomplete. I'm just going to put two brackets here and put, let's say UIHostingController. And then we'll put root view, and we'll put $, we'll put title page. And then we'll put $0. Okay, now let me explain this. Let me make this bigger so you can kind of see what's going on. all we're doing here is we're mapping over our titles that we're passing in, and we're creating UI hosting controllers upon each instance. So subscribe, comment, and maxcodes.io. So 3 hosting controllers, and then we're passing in a root view to that, and that's being generated off of our title page we created here, of which we're passing the title in from each one of these. Okay, so it's creating 3 instances of title page, and we're creating hosting controllers out of those and putting it in here, okay? And they're of type title page. Then what we're doing is we're creating our page view controller representable, and we're passing in those hosting controllers into the view controller representable, okay? And then since hosting controller is a subclass of UIViewController, it will allow it as the same type, okay? So these are, you can think of these as view controllers, but they are hosting controllers because they contain our title pages, okay? So think about that. We're creating view controllers off of SwiftUI Views. So we're taking 3 instances of this, subscribe, comment, maxcodes.io, SwiftUI types, views, right? And we're creating view controllers out of those. And in order to do that, we need to use UIHostingController. So we're creating these view controllers with SwiftUI Views. So now we have those controllers in our page controller, but how do we get it to appear on the screen? And what we can do is hit resume here, and we can go into update UIViewController, and we can say UIViewController, make sure it matches this right here, and we'll say dot set view controllers, and we're just going to make an array, and we're going to say controllers at 0. So we're going to take the first controller we're passing out, right? And that controller is going to be containing this title page with a title of subscribe. Okay, so then what we're going to do is change the direction to forward, and animated we'll put true, completion we'll just get rid of that. So at this point, if we hit resume, it should just be saying subscribe. Now if none of this makes sense, just go ahead and feel free to pause the video right here, and that should contain all of our code that we've written, right? So go ahead and get that in there and make sure it's working, and just kind of re-go over that first like 5 minutes if you want to of me explaining this. I'd rather have you just watch it and then re-watch the video, but do what you need to do. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we actually need it to go between each one of these items, right? We need to implement the actual scrolling, right? How do we do that? Well, we need to conform to the UIPageViewController data source methods, and I hit this play button as well so that it can kind of get that interaction. Okay, so now we have this little hand that is appearing here, but it doesn't do anything, okay? So again, the solution here is to conform to UIPageController delegate. Now, normally what we might do in a view controller, if this was of type UIPageViewController, is we put a comma here and put UI and PageViewController data source, right? But we're not gonna do that. We're gonna follow the SwiftUI pattern. So what I'm gonna do is Command X this data source method. You'll see it also says non-class type PageViewController cannot conform to NS object protocol because this is from UIK. It's not part of SwiftUI, right? So what we need to do is take that out, and we need to create this class called coordinator. So we'll say class coordinator, and this is gonna be within our PageViewController. And we're gonna say let parent is of type PageViewController. Okay, so the parent is gonna be this PageViewController class, the class that contains this. And then we're gonna create an initializer, and this is going to take in our parent. I'm gonna put an underscore, and then I'm gonna put PageViewController. And then we're just gonna say self.parent is equal to parent. So what's gonna happen is when we initialize this, it's gonna take in this PageViewController and set the parent of the coordinator to the PageViewController instance. Now, what do we do now? Let's go ahead and save that, and you will get this error, right? It says it doesn't conform to UIViewControllerRepresentable. Now that we've provided a class coordinator, we need to implement a method called makeCoordinator. I'm gonna take this method and I'm gonna put it down here above coordinator just so it's kind of in a better place, all right? Now, it would probably look good if this was all above here or just all down here, but make sure they're kind of in the right spot. Like coordinator is next to coordinator, right? Okay, so what we need to do here is just create an instance of our coordinator class and return it. Okay, now this is where some stuff gets tricky and it's under the hood, but we don't really need to understand all of the inner workings at this moment, or really ever, but eventually on this channel, you'll gain an understanding of this stuff even better. But essentially what we need to do is just say coordinator, and then we need to pass in the parent, which is going to be self. Okay, so this instance of PageViewController. All right, now what we need to do is conform to the UIPageController data source or whatever it's called, right? So I'm gonna put a comma after coordinator, or a, let's see, yeah, it'd be a colon, right? And we're just gonna put NS object, and then we're gonna put a comma, and we're gonna put UIPageViewController data source. And then what we can do is just kind of wait a second, and then it's gonna say we don't conform to the protocol. We can hit fix. It'll give us ViewController before and ViewController after. Now, this is a little bit complicated, so you might have to go over this a few times, but the logic is pretty straightforward once you understand it. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to first understand these methods. What is ViewController before and ViewController after? Well, if I were to compile this, it's not compiling at the moment, so let's get rid of these code things so you can kind of understand visually what's going on as I explain this. Let's just return, for now, let's just return self.parent.controllers at 0. Okay, I'm going to do that for both of these methods. And nothing will work yet, even still, because we haven't set the data source of the page view controller. So ignore that for now. We don't need it to work. We don't want it to work at the moment. I want to explain these methods. Okay, so let's hit resume. And you will see the subscribe. All right, where is it? All right, so subscribe, right? So basically what we want to happen is when we swipe left, we want to display the next one, comment, right? And then we swipe again, we see maxcodes.io. But we also want to be able to swipe right and have it go around and wrap to maxcodes.io. Now, how do we do that? Well, we need to provide the logic to these methods. Okay, so ViewController before you can think of as the controller that's before subscribe. So if we swipe left, we're now at the controller before. So essentially what we're doing is we're providing this method with that controller. So if I were to return parent.controllers at 0 and swipe left, it would show subscribe again. And then if I were to go here, ViewController after, and swipe left, the one after it, that would be in this area, would be subscribe because we're just returning the same controller. So let's go ahead and set that up so you can see that. In make ViewController, let's say page ViewController dot data source is equal to self. And you're gonna see that normally we do this, right? But it's not gonna work because page ViewController data source isn't part of page ViewController here. So what we need to do is say context dot coordinator. Okay, so it's going to this class. Okay, so it compiles, and if we swipe, you'll see it's just trying to display subscribe again and again, right? So what we can do is fix this logic up, and instead of just returning it, we can say guard let index is equal to self.parent.controllers dot first index of UIViewController, and we're going to pass in ViewController, and we'll say else return nil. So let's think about this logic. We're getting the index of the controller we're currently on, so this should be 0 at compile time because of subscribe, right? Okay, so what we want to do is check if the index is equal to 0, then that means we're at subscribe, right? And the ViewController before is the one that's directly to the left of it, right? So if we're at 0, if we're at subscribe, which one do we want to return? Well, we want to return the last one, maxcodes.io, because we're flipping back, okay? So let's go ahead and write the code for that. We'll say return self.parent.controllers.last. And then if we're not at 0, let's just return self.parent.controllers at index -1, because we want to return the one directly before the one we're currently at. So with that compiled, if we swipe, you'll see it displays the correct one. If we do it again, it should display comment and then subscribe, right? But our right one still doesn't really work, okay? Because it's still returning subscribe each time. So we kind of just need to write the same logic in reverse for the second method. So go ahead and try that, or just watch along. What we're going to do is say guardlet index is equal to self.parent.controllers.first index. And you can think of first index as just the first one that is of the same type. So it's really just index. You can think of it like that. It has nothing to do with the before and after this first. Kind of confusing. We'll pass in ViewController, and we'll put else return nil, because we need to return something. So we'll return a nil ViewController. And then we'll say if index, and let's think about this logic. If index is equal to the last one, right? So we want to see if we're at the end of the tunnel, right? If it is, then we want to return the one after it, which is going to be subscribe, right? So if the index is equal to self.parent.controllers.count, and we want to hit -1, we want to type in -1, right? And the reason we want to do this is because indexes and the number of items in the array are going to be off, right? And the reason being is because indexes start at 0, right? So to get the first item, that would be subscribe, right? The second one would be 0 or 1, and that would be comment. And then 2 would be maxcodes.io, right? But then the count of the array is going to be 3 because there's 3 items. So we just want to put this -1 so that we're checking if the count of the controllers is the index of the current controller, which is 2. If we're at maxcodes.io, then we want to run this. Now, that probably didn't clear it up entirely, but by just going through this code, even after the end of this video, you'll be able to understand kind of what's going on here. We're just going to return self.parent.controllers.first, okay? Because if we're at the very end, if we're at maxcodes.io and we swipe right or left, the one that's after it, we want to return the first one. So if we're at the end of the array, we want to return the first one. And if that doesn't work, or that's going to work, but essentially if we're not at the end array, if we're at say 0 or 1, we just want to return the one directly in front of it, right? So what we need to do is just add one to the index. We'll say return self.parent.controllers at index +1. Okay, so that should be all the code we need to write. Let's go ahead and try it out. We swipe right, we see comment, we swipe right, we see maxcodes.io. And then the next time we swipe right, it's going to run this one, which is going to return the first item in the array. Okay, so we're at the end of the array. Our index is 2, and the count -1 is 2. So if the index is 2, run self.parent.controls first, and that's going to be subscribe. Okay, so I think that's the clearest I can explain it, and that's how you implement a page view controller, a UI page view controller inside of SwiftUI Views. Okay, now this is a lot of code for very simple UI, right? But with this knowledge, you can kind of implement a whole bunch of other things with this code, right? So just keep this code in mind and come to understand it, and watch this video a few times if you need to, but eventually you should be able to understand this. And what I actually recommend is that after you've watched this video a couple times and typed it out, I actually recommend you try and open a new project and write it from scratch, only looking at it when you really need to, because that's what I did to become familiar with it. Okay, so that's it for this video. And if you actually enrolled in the SwiftUI course I put out, I actually unpublished it, but the reason I unpublished it is because I wasn't able to get everything out when I intended to. So if you subscribe to that and you're wondering where all that content is, I'm gonna send out an announcement to the course sometime tomorrow, I think, with all the details on that and when it's coming out. So just stay tuned for that if you've enrolled in that course. And if you're not, well, just ignore all that. All right, so essentially we've completed this and you understand better how these things work. In the next video I'll probably upload is the same code. So we'll start here and we're gonna put dots at the bottom, right? So like a little control area. I can't remember what it's called, but we'll do that. All right, that's it. Leave a like, subscribe, check out the website, join the mailing list at maxcodes.io for more updates, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.